Welcome back to part 2 of our nonverbal communication lecture. In this part, we're going to go over all of these different types of nonverbal communication and nonverbal communication competence. So first, we have physical appearance. How we present ourselves to others communicates a great deal about us. As I mentioned before, nonverbal communication is continuous, and physical appearance and clothing is no different. It's impossible not to communicate something about yourself through what clothes you choose to put on. It's definitely culturally influenced, and your appearance can impact your credibility. This is one reason why we tell you to dress in business casual clothing when you present. And even more so, clothing can indicate social position, education level, personal identity, and more. Along with clothing, hairstyles and body shape and size communicate messages to others. Our society tends to privilege and respond better to people who are more physically attractive, and here is an example of the beauty bias in action. So my mom used to be a trial attorney, and she's definitely conventionally attractive. And she said to me on multiple occasions that she believes that she's won cases where she didn't have the best argument simply because the jury found her attractive, sided with her and her client. So as you can see, the beauty bias has real material implications. Next, we have facial communication. This is a big one for me. I'm very expressive, cannot hide what I am thinking, and our faces communicate our feelings whether we intend to communicate these things or not. So if we look happy and this also has real implications like the beauty bias. If we look happy and smile a lot, we communicate an air of trustworthiness. But if we look angry and avoid eye contact, others might perceive us as shifty or untrustworthy. So much is communicated with our eyes: confidence, seriousness, warmth, anger. In the United States, we tend to privilege higher levels of eye contact and rely on eye contact as a benchmark on how others are feeling. If I'm having a conversation with my sister and she stops making eye contact with me, that signals to me that she could be disinterested, or depending on what we're talking about, that she's uncomfortable. However, in other cultures, such as Chinese and Japanese cultures, lowering the eyes is a sign of deference and respect. But that may not be immediately apparent to Americans and could cause miscommunications. We heavily rely on facial expressions to indicate how we're feeling and interpret how others are feeling. We make judgments and change what we're going to say based on what we see on others' faces. Culturally, it's easier to decode facial expressions if all communicators are from the same culture, even though there are universal facial expressions that transcend culture. Next, we'll talk about gestural communication. Gestures accompany our verbal messages even when we don't realize it. I usually talk with my hands frequently, which can indicate that I'm passionate about what I'm talking about, or I could be upset or frustrated. That being said, there are 3 main categories of gestural communication. First, manipulators are hand motions that groom, rub, or squeeze other body parts. These gestures alone don't have meaning, but in conjunction with verbal messages, they can indicate nervousness or discomfort. So when I watch speeches and I see students fidgeting, playing with their hair, tugging on their clothes, crossing their arms, swaying, I take this as a sign of nervousness and some nervous energy. Next, illustrators are gestures that help explain the verbal message from one person to another. This occurs at the same time as a verbal message, and it helps the formulation of words. So when I'm speaking with my hands, I'm using illustrators to emphasize my point or emotions to whoever I'm talking to. Lastly, emblems are gestures that have meaning outside of verbal messages. These are gestures such as waving goodbye, using a thumbs up to indicate good luck, or using the middle finger when you're displeased with somebody. As with previous nonverbal cues, it's important as a competent communicator to remember that gestures do not mean the same thing in every country and culture. So, for example, when I cross my arms over my chest, in this culture, it communicates that I'm upset, closed off, or defensive, but in Fiji, the same gesture indicates respect. Next, we'll talk about touch communication. Touch is can be a vital expression of warmth, love, and intimacy, but on the other hand, touch can be misused and abused to communicate power. It's key to know what type of touch is appropriate in certain situations. There are 5 types of touch to be aware of and understand when they are appropriate to use. First is the functional professional touch. It's the least intense and intimate form of touch. This touch takes place between doctors and patients, which we see in this slide, and between coaches and athletes, for example. Next is the social polite touch, which tends to be a handshake in American culture, or hug and a perfunctory kiss on each cheek in European cultures. These touches also occur in business relationships and formal occasions. Third is the friendship warmth touch, which is frequently misunderstood due to the general ambiguity of nonverbal communication. These types of touches include hugs, pats on the backs, and arm around the shoulders. What's most important about this type of touch is that it has to be negotiated within each relationship. Each person is different and has different boundaries and comfort levels when it comes to touch. Next, the love and intimacy touch is used around family members, very close friends, and significant others. It's communicated through holding hands, touching an individual's cheek, and hugging. And then lastly is the sexual touch, which is the most intimate and personal of all touches. It is the most restrictive and requires verbal, enthusiastic consent. When this boundary is transgressed, it leads to abuse, manipulation, and legal repercussions. What all of these types of touch have in common is understanding what is desirable and acceptable in each relationship and situation. Too much or too little of a touch can send a powerful message and have lasting implications. Touch taboos occur when cultural and social boundaries are transgressed. For example, in 2006, when President George W. Bush gave German Chancellor Angela Merkel an uninvited shoulder massage, she responded with dismay, discomfort. She shrugged her shoulders up, and her response shows that this type of touch was inappropriate, unwelcome. Next, we have voice communication. As I stated before, nonverbal cues include how we manipulate the words we speak, and this is called paralanguage. Paralanguage is divided into 3 different categories. First, vocal characterizers are laughing, yelling, crying, whining. These actions generally characterize the whole of the message. If a student is whispering as they give a speech in front of the class, this may indicate nervousness or anxiety. Second, vocal qualifiers are things like volume, pitch, rate, and tone, most commonly referred to tone of voice. Let's watch a bit of this video so we can see how tone can affect the meaning of a message.
Fine. And there's a sentence on the internet, it's only 7 words, that I've been seeing all over the place when you look at tone of voice and so forth, that I want to share with you. It's only 7 words, but depending upon how you emphasize those words, the meaning of the sentence changes. So here it is in the basic sense. I'll just say it straight one time. I never said she stole the money. So I tried not to emphasize anything there. And now I'll do it where I repeat it, but I emphasize different parts of the sentence each time, and notice how it changes the meaning. I never said she stole the money. 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 And I never said she stole the money. So I'm hitting those words every time I say the sentence a little differently.
Okay, so as we can see, the emphasis and the difference in tone on each word changes the meaning of what the speaker is trying to convey. Lastly, vocal segregates are the ums, the uhs, the likes that we hear people speak. Usually these fillers come out when people are thinking, formulating sentences, or are nervous and uncomfortable. Next, we have spatial communication. The space between people is another type of nonverbal communication. Proxemics is the spatial separation that individuals naturally maintain in various interpersonal situations. The four distances are intimate, personal, social, and public, which, as you can see, are listed from least amount of space between individuals to the most amount of space. If strangers enter the intimate distance with one another, maybe in an elevator, they may feel uncomfortable and therefore avert their eyes. But between close friends, family members, and partners, interacting in the intimate zone communicates the warmth and tenderness of a relationship. The personal zone is a place where coworkers interact. The social zone usually takes place in academia, some places of work, stores and restaurants. And finally, the public zone, which has the most space between people, is usually enacted at speeches, lectures, and concerts. While the audience may be closer together and invading individuals' personal space, there is a large amount of space between the lecturer or act, indicating that they are the focal point. Cultures become accustomed to their spaces, and people may defend them when they feel their boundaries are being transgressed. This is called territoriality. In regards to our home, we use hedges and fences to communicate the lines of our space, telling others to keep out. And I can almost guarantee that all of you find a comfortable seat in each class and you sit there every week. When someone takes your seat, you may feel irritable or annoyed because someone had the audacity to steal your assigned seat. This is an indication that you are feeling territorial over that seat. I know I've been there, and it still happens to me. And then lastly, we have environmental communication. It may be hard to believe, but even our buildings and how they are designed communicate how people are supposed to use the space. Airports, for example, communicate speed and limit the communication meant to be had between others. The seats are uncomfortable and tend to have armrests between each seat to communicate that this is not a place for relaxation or prolonged conversations with others. So I'm going to end this lecture here, and then in our last chunk, we will talk about nonverbal competence.